Okay, everybody, hello. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Stephen Brown, Executive Director of the ACLU of Rhode Island. I'm just going to MC this. I'm going to introduce everybody, make a few comments, and then we're going to go right down the line, have people give some comments of their own, and then we will open it up for questions. We want to wait to have everybody speak before we have questions. First thing I want to tell people is who is not here today. Unfortunately, the lead plaintiff in this lawsuit, the Rhode Island Latino Arts, and its executive director, Marta Martinez, could not be here.
How come?
She had other engagements. This has been a whirlwind of a case to put together. Maybe Lynette can say something about it. If you're interested, it's all been put together very quickly in a very short period of time. You'll hear about that. Also missing are a number of the attorneys from the National ACLU. This is a joint case between the ACLU, with the ACLU of Rhode Island and the National ACLU. They are in New York, but they've put an enormous amount of effort into the lawsuit that we filed today. So just to give a brief introduction, the ACLU and the ACLU of Rhode Island have today filed a lawsuit against the National Endowment for the Arts and its implementation of one of the many unconstitutional executive orders that the President has issued in his first month of office. In particular, this one requires applicants for NEA grants to attest that they will not, quote, promote gender ideology, close quote, in order to be eligible for funding, and it bars funding of any projects that does this, whatever this is. The lawsuit, as you'll hear from Lynette, challenges on various legal grounds the agency's attempt to undermine a law that was explicitly designed to reward artistic merit and is instead seeks to require federally funded art to meet certain ideological standards. As you'll also hear from our speakers, this new requirement has had a devastating effect on the arts community. It's caused enormous confusion as everybody tries to figure out what promoting gender ideology means. And it's just another example of this administration's relentless efforts to start culture wars instead of governing. We're really pleased to have an array of artists and art groups from across the Northeast represented in this lawsuit. Three of the plaintiffs who are here come from other states. I do think it's apropos that the lawsuit get filed in Providence, the creative capital, the home of RISD. And it's also worth noting that Senator Claiborne Pell was one of the major supporters of the establishment of the National Endowment for the Arts back in 1965. So as you will also hear, the stakes of this lawsuit are very high for those who care about the arts and artistic freedom and who object to the government's institution of loyalty oaths, which is what this boils down to. With that, I'll turn it over to Lynette, and she will discuss the background and the legal issues involved in the case.
Thanks. I am one of the attorneys filing this case on behalf of 4 plaintiffs, 4 arts organizations, and I'm working with the National Office of the American Civil Liberties Union. This is a very much a joint effort, and I am one of the players in this piece. A substantial amount of work has been done by the attorneys with the National Office, who unfortunately cannot be here today. But we just literally filed the motion seeking emergency relief, which is why it took me a couple minutes to get in here, and sent out copies to the General Counsel for the National Endowment for the Arts. The National Endowment for the Arts was created to support artistic excellence in the community, and not to create a government theater or a government arts program, but rather to support expression in the community, the national community, and it's very clear in the statutes what the criteria are and what is not. Our lawsuit relies on the statutory enabling acts, and as they've been interpreted and updated, and also on the United States Constitution, which prohibits vagueness in statutes by the government and prohibits interference with freedom of speech. In this case, the Administrative Procedures Act also is involved because our position is that the statute creates the standards and the compliance with, let me back up. There's an executive order, one of many by the president. This one has to do with something called promoting gender ideology, and it prohibits promoting gender ideology, and it requires any entity that's applying for a grant from the NEA to both certify that they're not going to promote gender ideology and that they will be exposed to a variety of civil and potentially even criminal or administrative penalties if they violate that. Our lawsuit points out that that is contrary to the statute that created the NEA, is arbitrary and capricious. The standard of promoting gender ideology is unknown and therefore vague and inapplicable. And also, it's apparently saying that it's okay to be anti-gender ideology, but not for it, if that's what promoting means. And that's what we call viewpoint discrimination, where the government is saying, this is okay, but that's not. And those are the issues. How it impacts the artistic community is just unimaginable in terms of the scope and the fear and intimidation and chilling effect that trying to understand or comply with these requirements has on everyone in the community, which is why we are seeking emergency relief to prevent the NEA from enforcing this provision.
Thank you, Lynette. Next we have Giselle Bird, who is Executive Director of the Theater Offensive, which is based in Boston.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you all are continuing to stay safe and healthy amidst these tumultuous times. As was stated, my name is Giselle Bird, and I'm the Executive Director of the Theater Offensive, based in Boston, Massachusetts, where our mission is to present liberating art by, for, and about queer and trans people of color that transcends artistic boundaries, celebrates cultural abundance, and dismantles oppression. We welcome all into our sacred spaces, where our humanity is the same as yours. All of our work, most of which has been NEA funded, reflects all of our humanity. I am a proud Black trans woman from the South, who is the daughter of an exceptional woman who went to segregated schools, the granddaughter of loving people who survived the Jim Crow era, and I am the descendant of slaves. I am also the first Black trans woman to lead a regional theater in the United States. And it is in this moment that I not only carry with me their voices of my family, but the voices of my ancestors and transcestors whose lives and stories have often gone untold due to the ongoing epidemic of violence and oppression towards our community. Now, I can't truly begin without acknowledging the land upon which all of us stand and are in at this moment, and have filed this lawsuit. This country was founded upon indigenous land that was stolen from its inhabitants. Rhode Island sits upon the land of the Pequot, Nipmuc, Niantic, Wampanoag, and specifically here in Providence, the Narragansett people. At the Theater Offensive, we affirm that it's important to understand and honor the history of the indigenous land that we occupy, while recognizing that this acknowledgement is insufficient and doesn't undo legacies of violence and displacement of indigenous people. Now, as settlers in these lands, we must confront our own contradictions and violence and work in solidarity with and hold the dualities of all oppressed peoples. And so we ask you to join this practice of uncovering such truths as we pave a future of decolonization and reconciliation. Now, as you all are well aware, our country is in a fragile state, one in which we are seeing that there is indeed no liberty and justice for all. It is for the select, elite, white few. And since January 20th, we have been replete with executive orders that are meant to confuse, disrupt, and deprive us of the very liberation that our ancestors and transcestors fought for. And as I watched the recent address to Congress, I didn't sit in fear or disdain. I do not succumb to mediocrity, and I will not start now. Instead, my radical optimism viewed the remarks and turned off my television with a sense of clarity. One major moment that stuck out to me was the closing remark stating that we are going to forge the freest, most advanced, most dynamic, and most dominant civilization ever to exist on the face of this earth. Now, if that is what our president decrees, who are we to not comply? That is on our own terms. If creating the freest civilization on this earth is the goal, that calls for the liberation of all people in all spaces, including artistic ones, where we must fight against any and all forms of systemic oppression, which is why we are gathered here today. And I am honored to be here. The National Endowment for the Arts' purpose is to advance opportunities for arts participation and practice, to foster and sustain an environment in which the arts benefit everyone in the United States. In their latest project requirement, stating that federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology, is a direct departure from its mission. The beautiful trans, non-binary, and gender expansive community is not a monolith, y'all. We have always been here defining cultural moments and movements for centuries on end, and we will continue to do so. And at the Theater Offensive, we have a long-standing history of NEA funding, which has in fact supported trans, non-binary, and gender expansive narratives in our mission, and we will be applying in this grant cycle, but we will not comply to illegal requirements, which is why we have filed this lawsuit, and we thank you. And so I look to our queer aesthetics, which is our moral compass at the Theater Offensive, that say that we take care of ourselves, we take care of each other, we take care of our people, and that is why I'm here today. These actions by the NEA are embedding the continued attack on our trans, non-binary, and gender-expansive siblings, and it is now hindering the ability for us to tell our stories through an artistic lens, creating censorship of the art that we create, essentially erasing our stories from access to funding. We do not comply with this, nor will we sit idly by as this administration continues to reign with the crown of oppression over our community. This is a direct violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, First Amendment, and Fifth Amendment. We, as artists, are a reflection of the times, and it is our duty to remind people of the past, acknowledge the present, and chart a way for the future. We have told our stories through a pandemic in which none of us could fathom a return to normal, a period of immense racial reckoning throughout the world, seeing injustice at the forefront as we saw the unjust murders of Sam Nordquist, George Floyd, and learned about countless others, and some that had gone unnamed for so many years. And we have seen war and genocide on our television screens and learned about those that don't even get airtime. We are seeing censorship at its peak, and this moment is no exception. And so in this moment, amidst my radical optimism, I look to our aesthetic of edge and queering and ambidextrous, which states that taking flight requires standing on the edge of the precipice. The leap into the murkiness of the unknown is fecund and fertile. And while the path of this lawsuit is unknown, one thing is definite: our battle cry is as loud as ever. It is often said that we have to weather the storm, but I strongly believe that in fact, the storm has to weather us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giselle. Next, we have Jess Ducey, who is board co-chair of National Queer Theater, which is based in New York. Yes?
Thank you, Giselle, and everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Jess Ducey. I'm a queer and non-binary writer, producer, fundraiser, and occasional clown. I also have the great honor of serving as the co-chair of the board of National Queer Theater. We are a theater collective dedicated to celebrating the brilliance of queer artists and providing a home for unheard storytellers and activists. One of our flagship programs is the annual Criminal Queerness Festival, which will celebrate its 7th year in June. We created the festival to be a beacon of artistic freedom, a place for trans and queer artists to share their stories, free from fear, censorship, and violence. Over the years, the festival has featured works by emerging artists from more than a dozen countries that criminalize homosexuality. Even more importantly, though, it's become a vibrant community celebrating the rich tapestry of queer identity and experience, even as we come under increasing attack here at home. In addition to funding from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the JKW Foundation, NYC Pride, and the Terrence McNally Foundation, NQT was awarded NEA grants in 2023 and 2024 to support the festival, and we have been offered a third grant for the upcoming June 2025 festival, but we don't know if that will be awarded yet. In January of this year, NQT received an Obie Award for the Criminal Queerness Festival. The Obies, for the lawyers and other non-theater nerds among us today, honor the highest caliber of the off and off-Broadway theater. To have the artistic merit of our work recognized by the endowment, not once, not twice, but 3 times, was thrilling for us. And I'd be lying if I pretended we didn't squeal when we found out about the Obie. Despite what you may have heard, queer and trans people are also human, and we too appreciate external validation. But that validation pales in comparison to the transcendent rush of sitting in the audience next to someone, seeing their identity and experience on stage for the very first time. That's what drives all of our work at NQT, a steadfast belief that stories matter. When we are scared, hurt, lost, or sad, art reminds us that we're not alone. It can teach us the words for how we feel and who we are. Art allows us to imagine new worlds and futures. It helps us preserve our cultures and traditions, even in the face of oppression. Art gives us hope, and what could be more powerful? If our stories didn't matter, artists wouldn't find themselves silenced over and over throughout history. So, while ordinarily I'd rather be writing or color coding a budget or devouring a draft of a new play, I'm honored to be here today, standing in solidarity with my fellow trans, queer, and gender nonconforming artists. And I want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge the trans elders and ancestors who paved the way for us to be here today. Thanks to their bravery, I know that we have the ability to shape a more just and beautiful world. In some ways, I'm flattered that our mere existence outside the binary is capable of causing such a fuss. It is an acknowledgement of our power. I'm fortunate enough to also call Aotearoa, New Zealand home, and I'd like to share a Māori proverb that I turn to for strength in challenging times. He aha te mea nui o te ao. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. When we talk about ensuring that our trans and queer young people grow up to be happy and healthy trans and queer adults, we often reassure them that it gets better, but that's not true. It doesn't get better. We make it better. Whether a small action or a grand gesture, caring for the most vulnerable amongst us is a choice that we can make every single day. Affirming queer and trans rights is not an ideology or a box to tick, or not tick in this case. It is a means to honor the people at the heart of everything that we do as National Queer Theater. It is our reason for existing. So, to my fellow queer and trans artists out there, as long as you keep telling your stories, we'll keep fighting to share them. We need you, now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Next is Amelia Cachapero, who is co-executive director of national and global programming for the Theater Communications Group, which is also based in New York.
Hi. Yeah, I'm doing some tech stuff here.
That's what we do.
I know. All good. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. I'm Amelia Cachapero, she, her, sha, co-executive director of national and global programming with Theater Communications Group. I am not standing here alone, actually, but standing with me are my partners, Letitia Ellerson, who is the co-executive director of national engagement, and Alicia Tansik, co-executive director of national operations and business development, and our full board and our full staff are standing with me and with us on this. Theater has always been about connection, bringing people together to share stories and imagine new possibilities. Right now, that purpose is being challenged. The recent restriction on NEA funding threatens artistic expression and limits the stories so many theaters can tell. This restriction forces applicants to agree that they will not promote what is being referred to as gender ideology in order to receive federal funding. This restriction undermines the rights of theaters to tell stories that reflect our diverse communities. That's why today, TCG is joining this lawsuit led by the ACLU alongside the National Queer Theater, Rhode Island Latino Arts, and the Theater Offensive to challenge this restriction. We know the power of collective action, which is why we've joined our co-plaintiffs in this fight. Theaters should not have to choose between funding and artistic freedom. TCG's mission is to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology. Well, there is no better way for us to live our mission than to stand in solidarity with artists and theaters facing threats. TCG serves the national not-for-profit theater community, and it's composed of theaters, individuals, communities, colleges, universities, and other affiliates. We're a membership organization, but our programs and services embrace and serve the entire theater ecology, from productions in the smallest black box venues to after-school student workshops in cafetoriums to storefront theaters to the largest houses with more than 1,000 seats. We embrace and serve those working in our theaters whose identities are not monolithic, yes, Giselle, not monolithic, but all genders, races and ethnicities, ages, religions, immigrants, and those US born. All of them, all of us, deserve to be recognized, celebrated, and supported. TCG has long advocated for increased NEA funding and policies that foster inclusion, and that will not stop. We will not stop doing that. We still deeply believe in their mission, the NEA's mission, and continue to support annual appropriations for the NEA. We want the NEA to be the best version of itself, a champion of theaters engaging deeply with their communities without interference. At its best, NEA funds have supported meaningful projects that may not have otherwise happened in communities from Honolulu to Juneau to Tucson to Montgomery to here in Providence. And access to this core support must continue. I'm repeating this to make sure our friends and colleagues at the NEA hear this. Hopefully they will hear this, see this, know this. We want the NEA to be the best version of itself, the way Congress intended it to be when they established it in 1965. If one of us is attacked, we are all endangered. Our co-plaintiffs have taken a courageous step forward in filing this lawsuit, knowing full well the risks of standing on the front lines. Their leadership deserves TCG's support, and their artistry deserves NEA's support. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Amelia. And last but not least is Christy Dubois, who is Executive Director of the Choreography Project right here in Rhode Island. The project is not a plaintiff in this suit, but only because of the rush in putting it together. They've been extremely supportive, and we're glad to have her say a few words.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Christy Dubois, and I'm the Executive Director of Choreography Project, a nonprofit based in Rhode Island dedicated to supporting and uplifting dance artists in our community. Our mission is built on the belief that arts should be accessible to all, regardless of background, identity, or resources. That mission is now under direct threat. Executive Order 14173 is an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It imposes restrictions that undermine federal funding for arts organizations like ours, organizations that champion equity, access, and representation in the arts. Under these new restrictions, the very nature of our work may render us ineligible for crucial funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, a lifeline for many arts organizations. The intent behind this order is clear. It aims to silence historically excluded voices and restrict opportunities for artists from diverse backgrounds. This is not just an arts issue, it's a civil rights issue. Dara Capley, a dancer whose choreography career was launched by the Choreography Project, recently told us, "A lot of the art Specifically, the dance that we see today does not represent the actual population. Until we diversify who gets to tell stories and share their vision, art will continue to die because people will stop being interested. Here in Rhode Island, this executive order is a direct threat to artists, choreographers, and organizations like ours that rely on federal funding to sustain their work. The Choreography Project provides emerging and established artists with opportunities to create, collaborate, and share their voices. Without the support, many will lose access to funding, platforms, and mentorship that will allow them to thrive. One choreographer in our residency explored themes of belonging and human connection, bringing together dancers from diverse backgrounds. Another artist used their choreography to challenge outdated norms, redefining who gets to lift who takes up space, and how dance can be more inclusive. Their work gave dancers a new sense of strength and agency in their own bodies. This kind of artistic innovation is only possible when artists are given the freedom and resources to tell their stories. Without organizations like ours, artists like them, who introduce fresh perspectives to the Rhode Island arts scene, may lose the opportunity to develop and showcase their work. Dancers who train for years rely on programs like ours to bridge the gap between education and professional experience. Without this support, young artists will have fewer chances to train, perform, and establish careers. The impact extends beyond individuals. The arts are a major economic driver in Rhode Island, supporting theaters, event spaces, and small businesses. If arts organizations lose their funding, it won't just affect performers. It will impact the entire creative economy here. When we talk about diversity in the arts, we aren't talking about a political agenda. We are talking about real people. Choreographers who use their work to explore identity, dancers who rely on residencies to access professional opportunities, and audiences who benefit from a thriving and inclusive arts community. If this executive order stands, we will see a chilling effect across Rhode Island, where artists and organizations feel pressure to strip away work focused on inclusion just to survive. That's not just a loss for the arts. That's a loss for all of us. Choreography remains a field where men, particularly cisgender men, hold a disproportionate share of leadership and creative opportunities, despite the dance force being majority women and non-binary artists. Let's talk about the numbers. In the 2022-2023 season, only 32% of works programmed by the 150 largest US ballet and classically inspired companies were choreographed by women. And at the largest ballet companies, that number dropped to just 14.9%. That's why we stand with the Rhode Island ACLU in this lawsuit. We may not be on today's filing, but we are committed to joining this fight. We're prepared to provide any help we can in the progression of this lawsuit. This is bigger than one lawsuit. This is about ensuring that every artist, regardless of race, gender, disability, or background, has the right to tell their story, to share their art, and to be supported in doing so. We need the public support. We need our community to speak out. We encourage everyone to stay informed, contact your representatives, and support arts organizations facing this threat. And most importantly, we need to remind those in power that our nation's cultural and artistic legacy depends on inclusion, not exclusion. We will not be silent, and we will not stop fighting for the future of the arts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. I do want to also echo Amelia's comments about courage of individuals to be plaintiffs in the climate we live in now. So thank you all for participating and being here. All right, so with that, we'll ask questions. Just so you know, we'll wait 20 seconds to move the mics for everybody. So don't answer right away, okay?
Jess, your group is a named plaintiff in this suit. Let me ask how it will directly affect, change in funding will directly affect your organization. And when he finishes putting the mics in place, we can... Thank you.
So yes, we've received NEA grants for the last 2 years to fund the festival that I spoke about earlier, and we have an offer for this current year that is currently in limbo, and we're waiting to see. We are aware that filing this lawsuit may put that in jeopardy, but we know that applying for future any future funding puts that in jeopardy because we can in good conscience tick that loyalty pledge box.
Does it go to the heart of what you do? Can you continue to operate without these funds, or would this make an existential threat to your organization?
It does pose an existential threat to us. I think we've all seen that artists continue to strive to make work with and without funding, but being able to pay artists, being able to give them a livelihood, being able to help develop work, we lose that without funding. And if this extends to other funding sources, it puts even more of our funding in jeopardy.
So that could run a risk of organizations shutting down permanently.
Yeah, I think you could see organizations shutting down, cutting staff, cutting programming, doing whatever they can to maybe try to keep the lights on. But
When is your festival?
it's during Pride, so it's in June.
June. So there's a time pressure here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Attorney Labinger, Pat Ford Coalition Radio Network. I wonder if you could discuss the impact, if you will, of the Finley v. NEA case in, I believe it was 1998. In that situation, you had the NEA being challenged under an a perceived anti-obscenity movement. Ultimately, a layman's reading of that case would say that the Supreme Court found for the NEA in their ability to, I'll use the word censor art.
So we, in our materials, both the complaint and our memorandum of law in support of our motion for extraordinary relief, we discussed the Finley case extensively. One of my colleagues who is part of our plaintiff attorney team is David Cole. He argued the Finley case on behalf of the petitioners. Ultimately, you're correct. There was rejected the ultimate claim, but they did so on the basis that the language was, they call it hortatory, which means aspirational, as opposed to an absolute exclusion, and it was on the area of essentially this goal of decency, but and they said it would be a different issue if it was basically saying we're going to support one side of a viewpoint but not another. Now, they didn't say categorically that would be illegal, but they distinguished between it, and they also accepted the NEA's argument that there wasn't an absolute bar that impacted these applicants. So we actually rely on the Finley case as supporting our position because the statute, the enabling statutes, say that artistic merit and excellence are the criteria, and the legislative history makes clear that this was not the creation of a government program, but rather to support the arts externally, and not say what is orthodox in the arts and what's prohibited. And so we believe that the Finley case is completely supportive of our position.
And just a
If
quick
any
follow-up.
restrictions would
If I
be
quick
fair.
follow-up, do you see this having to rise through the various levels of the judiciary, and is there an element of speed attached to this given the fundamental threat that it represents to these organizations?
We've asked for emergency relief. We believe that March 24 is an important date. So we have asked that our motion be heard on an expedited basis, and if necessary, get a temporary restraining order that freezes out application of this bar at this time, so people can apply without fear that they're subjecting themselves to criminal, civil, administrative penalties, denial on the basis that they don't meet this test of gender ideology, orthodoxy, whatever that means. And so we're asking for a quick hearing. Will there be an appeal by whoever loses? I mean, if we look around, that seems like it's certainly a distinct possibility, but this is on a very short track. We hope that we can convince what's been said is that the NEA is not the enemy. The NEA, these folks all look to the NEA as a wonderful source and resource, and they are, the NEA is being feels compelled by the executive order, and there's obviously these organizations are pushing back because they have their own beliefs and should not be chilled or censored by this executive order.
Forgive me, what happens on the 24th? You mentioned the 24th. What happens then?
24th is the date the last date to submit applications for grants in this round.
I see.
And there, and even though the awards are not made for many months, you have to get in the pipeline and you have to get prepared over a long period of time for production purposes.
And you just filed today. You don't have a date, or you don't have a judge yet?
Well, between the time that I filed and right now, we
You might.
might, but, 'cause, I mean,
You'll keep us posted.
Steve will, I will
Thanks.
not.
What, if any, content restrictions would be legal? Or is it all an infringement of First Amendment?
Well, I can't speak, to everything. I mean, obviously, there are criteria that you need to fit in, that you're meeting the criteria of this particular kind of grants proposal. But it's within the bounds of those criteria, not these extraneous things that are basically outside of the area of artistic excellence and merit. The individual grant applicant is supposed to decide on what kind of grant proposal they're submitting, and not have to go through checking the box that that they will not violate this requirement to promote gender ideology.
I'm having a hard time understanding what art looks like without diversity, equity, inclusion, without LGBTQ people involved in its creation. Does anybody have an idea of what that could even begin to? Yes, please.
It would be.
Hold on, just.
There you go. Boom.
Could you repeat your question for me one more time?
Sure. I'm having a hard time understanding what art looks like without diversity, equity, inclusion, and the participation of the LGBTQ community in it.
It would be void of truth. It would be void of truth. Our community, as I said earlier, has created cultural movements that have defined our history, our American history that is currently and actively attempted to be rewritten. So when you say, what will it look like? It will be void of truth, because there are perspectives and dynamics that each of our organizations bring into our artistic sphere. And so what will happen is you will start seeing the lack of folks coming into the museums because they no longer see their truth reflected in the artwork. There will not be people coming in to see plays and musicals because no longer do those shows reflect their livelihood and humanity. And a lot of people, I think, are forgetting that while this, where you cannot promote gender ideology is a harsh line in the sand, this is just the beginning. Because first it starts here, and then it starts permeating and moving through different spheres. So some of your most beloved pieces, such as Kinky Boots or La Cage aux Folles, will no longer be allowed to be seen or shared. We know that there has been a whole takeover at the Kennedy Center solely around the basis of drag artistry, which is prominent to our culture. It has defined how we view work. People have won Artistic Merit Awards, Tony Awards, for sharing these narratives. And without that, we are losing the truth of the people who inhabit this, as I said earlier, stolen indigenous land.
My question is for Christy. Christy, I'm James from Providence Business News. During your statement.
You can ask the question.
So my question to you, Christy, is you mentioned earlier about how this lack of funding or possible no funding coming in could impact the entire creative economy. Now, from certainly the arts part of it is an important aspect of it, but when it comes to the creative side, that is. So from the business side of things, like how will this sort of thing really impact? Is it because of lack of shows that means no audience is coming in and, you know, like I asked earlier, could possible theaters be closing down?
Right, so sure, that's exactly it. It could be theaters closing down. If you don't have audiences coming in, it's not going to create that groundswell of economic activity in the area. People tend to go to the theater and then go to dinner before or after. So restaurants could lose out on potential customers coming for pre-show or post-show food. It's also just beyond the people on the stage. It's your tech crews. It's your photographers. It's your costume designers, so your textile industry. It's really, the veins of this just have the potential to go far and wide throughout the entire state.
Have you heard from, now I know the Rhode Island Latino Arts is plaintiff in this suit, but have you heard, and I know you're speaking in support of the organization as a whole, even though you're not part of it, but have you also heard from maybe other organizations, like say for example, Trinity Rep or the GAM Theater? Have you heard any concerns about them that kind of help fuel this lawsuit?
I mean, I was brought into this pretty late into the game.
Okay,
So.
well maybe my question would be from Lynette or Steve.
Yes, there is lots of concern in the community. I've talked with a number of people in the arts community who are extremely concerned about how this plays out and waiting to see where this lawsuit goes.
Could I interject? Is my voice going to carry? It probably won't. As a theater service organization, we share info, gather info, share, distribute it. We've had webinars because there has been so much confusion and chaos in the field exactly about what to do. We had a webinar a couple of weeks ago. We had more than 1,000 people registered on it, and the questions were, what do I do? Who should I talk to? We've had conversations with different offices of legal attorneys who are representing the arts. There's no real consensus of opinion on what to do. And so we are hoping that by this injunction being put in place, it can go back to status quo, to a world in which our theater fields, our arts fields understand the parameters of what they are applying for, how they are moving through the administrative process. There is so much confusion now, and there is unneeded, unnecessary time, staff, resources, all going to try to figure out what it is rather than doing the work. Artists should be doing the work.
I have a question for Lynette. I don't know if you need to move the microphones or not, but I'm just wondering, what is your strategy to your clients? Are you suggesting to them that they fight this by applying for those grants? Or in this case, in the press release, it talks about Rhode Island Latino Arts appears to have capitulated. They're afraid to apply for a grant and it's changing their program. What should they be doing? What's the better strategy?
Well, I can't tell you what the better strategy is. I can tell you what the response is as we understand it and as my colleagues here who are in the field understand it. The first one I think is shell shock. Then it is a fear and intimidation. And then everyone has to decide with collaboration, consultation, how they're going to deal with these fundamental threats to their existence and their own freedom of expression. Now, some of them have decided, and you'll see it in the declarations, that they are filing the paper, in the absence of relief, they're filing the paperwork with an asterisk, so to speak, saying, I've checked the box because there's no way I can move forward on these documents without checking the box. But I'm telling you right now, I don't agree with it, it's unconstitutional. Others are changing, they're changing what they would submit. So this is clearly impacting their decision-making by the government as to what they should think and do in order to get a grant. And still others who are not at this table are either not filing it, they're not speaking, they're not filing anything at all. They may be so intimidated that they're not filing anything, or they may be filing something completely different. And of course, there's probably a substantial number of organizations that are filing what they would have filed, but that's where the orthodoxy is. If you're not on what is now the new fringe, that's my, sorry, I have a court conference I have to go to. And the courts are supersede press conferences. I just want you to know that I have my priorities.
One follow-up, if
Yeah.
I may, and forgive my ignorance here. Can you submit a grant without checking the box?
No.
No,
You
that's-
cannot get past.
But that's what,
The first stage in the NEA process, it's
Correct.
two-step. So the first stage is a simple, very quick submission due on March the 11th, and you have to tick the box. It's a portal, it's a platform, and
so
application.
that's what I was wondering. So it's a computerized
Yeah,
submission?
it's
Correct,
like a terms and
correct,
conditions
correct.
box.
And
Correct.
can an arts organization survive without federal funding?
That is a dilemma. Most of the field has still not recovered from the pandemic. Audiences have not returned in the same numbers. Funding, not only on the federal level, but on the private foundations, community foundations, all of the other sources, individuals, that has decreased and not picked back to the 2019 pre-pandemic levels. So yes, you are going to see organizations shutter, close, pause, regroup. Some bright spots are there are some organizations that have been partnering with each other so that more co-productions happen, but then that means ultimately in the long view less total productions happen, right? Because they're doing shared productions, each organization can't do individual, so the total is less. We're going to see a diminished field, no question.
And will we see constrictions on content as well? I mean, people will put out less confrontational things, I guess.
You might, yeah, there are definitely some theaters that I think their choice to respond is to so in our case for National Park, it's in our name, we can't
Right.
not. And so we're applying anyway with caveats that we can't do this. We can't not promote gender ideology. It hasn't been described, but our existence
Right.
is arguably doing that.
Right.
But other theaters, if they have a range of programming and something maybe doesn't fall in that, will maybe just submit for that. And so we could see trends over time where if you can't fund that kind of work, that queer work, trans work remains in the very low budget, very indie, scrappy space where people make it.
And I agree with you where it's embedded in the name. Ours is the Theater Offensive. We started in 1989 in response to the HIV/AIDS crisis as an arts organization. And we fought against the social injustices where they were seeing so many young, beautiful artists being lost to something that is still an epidemic in this country. And we are seeing that it is going to continue, especially with the loss of USAID. So there will be constrictions for some people, but for other orgs that have the ability to continue to do the work and push forward and fight it, we will. Because, as I said earlier, these stories are our truths. They do not disappear. Technically, if you want to be honest, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever spoken to a ghost?
Me, no. No.
You are. I do not exist according to this administration.
Oh, I see what
I am
you
a
mean.
black trans woman.
Can I, in a legal sense, is the issue the box because it's prior restraint? Or is it, like if they were to accept applications from everybody, but reject things that dealt with trans-related issues, that would also be illegal, right?
Yeah, I mean, as you heard, it's this process that stops people at the very beginning, but it doesn't solve the problem to say, okay, we'll let you apply, but we're going to deny you because you're promoting gender ideology. The goal of the lawsuit is to eliminate this requirement of denying funding based on gender ideology, as well as the initial step of requiring people to tick off this box that says they aren't going to promote it, again, whatever that means.
Thank you.
So my final question, Steve, for you is how confident are you to get the judge to favor the organizations, including the ACLU in this case?
I don't predict, but I will say I think we have a very strong case. As you heard from Lynette, the NEA statute is very clear that the criteria to be used are artistic merit and excellence, and this type of additional ideological restriction has absolutely no place in the law and is not only completely arbitrary, contrary to the law, but, as you've heard, unconstitutional under the First Amendment.